Welcome to Healing Childhood Trauma, the podcast for millennial women who are ready to heal from the past. Here, we have the deeper discussions on emotional well-being and practical tips that will empower you to transform your relationships and underlying anxiety from insecure to secure attachment. I'm Lizandra, your host and psychotherapist. I'm a little bit obsessed with human development, deep conversations, and finding the lesson even in the most challenging of circumstances. I'm very happy to have you with me on this journey of self-discovery where we unpack the past and heal in the present. There's a moment I notice sometimes, usually in early conversations or in consultation calls, where I can tell that someone isn't quite ready for therapy yet. And the reason is probably not what you think, because most people will assume that it's got something to do with awareness, like perhaps someone's either in denial or they haven't quite gotten to fit all the pieces of the puzzle yet, or they just don't get it. But honestly, what I find is that usually isn't the issue. A lot of the women that I see are actually really self-aware because they can explain their patterns, they can understand their past, and they've read the books, they've done the reflecting, they've almost over-analysed themselves in a lot of ways. And the difference isn't about if they're aware, it's more about where that awareness is going. And the moment I'm talking about is the moment when everything is still very much focused outwards. They're telling me in detail what their partner is doing wrong, what their family has done to them, why a situation is unfair. And just to be clear, often they're not even wrong. But therapy doesn't really work if the focus always stays on what everyone else is doing and everything that has happened outside of you. And it's not about blaming yourself that you are kind of stuck in these patterns of overthinking and remuneration, because if you've been in difficult dynamics or you've been treated badly, of course, it's human and it's very natural and understanding that you're going to want to be understood first. That's a really very human place to start. And validation and understanding those patterns are absolutely important. It's important to name and to validate your experience. And a typical example of that I might see, especially when working with someone who perhaps has been in a toxic relationship or there's been narcissistic abuse, is that you can spend a lot of time trying to understand the perspective of the other person because you are trying to make sense of their behaviors and you're trying to understand and you're trying to empathize, especially if you are a person who is very empathic and you have empathy for other people's experiences and you're aware that perhaps they've experienced their own childhood trauma, and the fact that they've experienced their own trauma is why they respond to you or why they behave towards you in the way that they do. And to a sense, it's important to have an awareness of understanding what someone else's experience is, but when that becomes the focus of you trying to make sense of their experience and why they have behaved the way that they have and trying to make sense of it because you want to understand them more in the hope that you understanding them will get them to change, that's often where you stay stuck. If the work stays at they need to change, you will stay stuck even if you're right. And so you might be listening to this and thinking, okay, but why would someone not be ready for therapy? Because it's not just about the awareness, there are usually other things that are going on underneath it. It feels very safe to focus outwards. And that's the truth. It's easier to try to understand and try to analyze someone else than it is for someone to focus and look at themselves. And for a lot of people, it feels safer to focus on everyone else or somebody else's experience. It feels safer to do that rather than looking at what they bring to the experience. So if you've spent years almost reading the room and managing other people, managing other people's emotions, feelings, expectations, trying to keep the peace, it's very likely that your brain is wired to scan outward. Your brain is wired to scan your environment and to try and find safety in your environment. So of course, turning that focus inwards, that can feel really, really uncomfortable, even a bit exposing, because sometimes the trying to make sense of things and trying to analyze other people almost, and I'll kind of stick with the example of, say, like a toxic relationship dynamic. People can get stuck in trying to understand what is a narcissist Like, what are the typical traits of what narcissism looks like? So they will go down the rabbit hole of understanding narcissistic personality disorder. They will go down the rabbit hole of understanding what gaslighting is, what hoovering is, all of these kind of terms that relate to how narcissists behave. What that does is that takes the focus away from what you bring and your patterns, because even though it's never your fault if you are in a toxic relationship dynamic, it's not your fault if somebody is being abusive towards you, and it's not about taking on the blame or the responsibility of that, but there is also a part of that has to come with self-ownership and self-accountability, so that you can break those patterns, so that you can understand yourself more in those dynamics. Because when you understand yourself more and you understand how your trauma is showing up and why your trauma means that sometimes relationships can become unhealthy because you either can't set boundaries or you don't see certain narcissistic patterns in people until it's too late, you have to address what that is that's within you in order for you to not be in that situation again. In order for you to come from a place of empowerment and for you to come from a place of change, but also strength in knowing who you are and becoming a person who can essentially protect yourself and spot what safe relationships not only feel like, look like, but also experience safety in relationships. And honestly, sometimes people are not ready for the consequences of change. Sometimes people aren't ready because they are not ready for what change actually brings. Because change isn't just about feeling better, it's also about doing things very differently. It's setting boundaries, it's disappointing people, being okay with disappointing people, outgrowing certain relationships. Doing things differently has real consequences. So staying in the pattern, even if it's frustrating, can feel more manageable than having to face uncertainty and the unknown. And something I see very often is that people really want to be fully understood first, and they want someone to validate and say, yeah, that shit was unfair, that shouldn't have happened. And that part's important and it matters. But if therapy becomes a place only where you're being validated and you're not also being gently challenged, these things don't really move. And there is a fine balance of being able to do that, because accountability isn't about blame, but it is about being able to hold up a lens with compassion, because that is also what helps you to change. It's not just the validation. Sometimes you do need to be told when, actually, I've noticed that sometimes when you do this, this is what happens. Or just being able to reflect more on how have you influenced things? How do you show up in these kind of scenarios? What part do you play in your relationships? What's your stuff? It's almost like, it's really, at the end of the day, it's just owning your shit. Owning your shit is hard to do. It's hard to do. It's hard to sit with. And our natural response is to be defensive. And it's okay to even feel somewhat defensive, even as you're listening to me now. Being defensive is also part of the process. And it's okay to feel that. It's okay to experience that. But I'm just naming it just so, you've just got that awareness that, change, doing things differently, changing patterns, it doesn't come easy. It can be painful, but it doesn't have to always be painful. It's moving away from the familiar. And change is scary. And another reason that I see is that sometimes people are not ready to go there because they just don't have the capacity. Someone just might not be ready because they are already overwhelmed. They are burnt out. They are already dealing with a lot. And trying to then unpack, emotions and look at themselves in a deeper way can feel like a lot. And therapy is a lot, not only financially, but it's the emotional way that you also have to show up, because it's not something that's passive. It is something that you have to actively participate in, because some people are coming to therapy because they want confirmation and validation. But others are coming because they want and they really need change. And those are two very different things. The shift I notice when someone is ready and they are showing up and doing the work is when the questions start to change. And it's questions like, why do I keep ending up here? Why is this so hard for me to walk away from? what does this bring up in me? That's when therapy really starts to move. And if you're not ready for therapy, that in itself is not a failure. It's just information for you to realize maybe there's something else that you might need first. Maybe that is more support. Maybe it's more stability, whether that is stability in your personal life, in your relationships. Maybe it's even more financial stability because, therapy is not free for the most part. Or maybe you just need more time. But at some point, there does need to be a willingness and a readiness to look at your side of the pattern, even when it's uncomfortable. If this has been hitting a bit, just sit with it. You don't even have to do anything with it straight away, but also don't ignore it either. Okay, thank you for listening. Welcome to Healing Childhood Trauma, the podcast for millennial women who are ready to heal from the past. Here, we have the deeper discussions on emotional well-being and practical tips that will empower you to transform your relationships and underlying anxiety from insecure to secure attachment. I'm Lizandra, your host and psychotherapist. I'm a little bit obsessed with human development, deep conversations, and finding the lesson even in the most challenging of circumstances. I'm very happy to have you with me on this journey of self-discovery where we unpack the past and heal in the present.